Yeah. So for this one, I'm going to break a cardinal rule. Yes, folks, the Pandorica opens, and only the Pandorica opens. Because you see, most of the time, actually basically every other time, unless I'm specifically only talking about like cliffhangers or have otherwise done a list that breaks these up, I always review two-parters as a single story. Because that's what I consider them to be, two halves of one continuous narrative. But this time, I am going to review each of these halves separately. Because I don't feel that the Pandorica opens flows seamlessly into the Big Bang. I actually think it's a really jarring shift. And I have vastly different feelings about each half of this two-parter. Which, I suppose, by the time I'm done with this review, that's a spoiler warning for my thoughts on the second half. But that's getting ahead of ourselves. The Pandorica opens. Finally, we get the culmination, or the first half of the culmination of the Cracks in Time storyline. We've heard the name Pandorica dropped before. What are the cracks? Where did they come from? What is this Pandorica? What's inside of it? Why does everybody want it? The answers are actually pretty dang good for most of these questions. It's always tough building up to a season finale, especially in Doctor Who. It's difficult to not have it feel like the big bads kind of just sort of show up when you need them to. And sometimes that does happen. I would argue that kind of happens in Series 3. Other times, you get a return of somebody who, yeah, we defeated them before, but now they're back. And this one does a pretty good job of upping the stakes from that, while not making it seem like it's nothing other than one-upsmanship. Because whereas normally we just have the Daleks or the Cybermen or, one single threat, usually the Daleks, showing up, now we have almost everyone that we've seen before, and technically a bunch of ones that we haven't seen in the new series. We don't actually see them, but names get dropped for classic era aliens who we don't see because they didn't have the costumes still sitting around. But hey, still, it's cool. So how do you bring all that together and not just make it feel like you're going, see, I brought them all here? Well, you give them a really good reason to do it. And this does. And a better reason than just defeating the Doctor, because obviously all these races have wanted to defeat the Doctor at one point or another for one reason or another, but they've never joined forces before. So it was going to have to be a threat much greater than the Doctor himself normally poses just on his own. And if they have inaccurately tied him to the cracks in time, and those cracks in time indicate an explosion that destroys the universe, well, they assume it's him. He's their enemy anyways. You get together everybody that hates him, and you go after and you take this guy down. And that's what they do. And it's pretty cool. It's pretty justified as far as giving them a reason to actually work together, which is always the trick when you're trying to do this kind of thing. As far as the whole thing of what's in the Pandorica, I clocked pretty early on, and I suspect most people did, that what was inside the box, or what was being referred to as being inside the box, was the Doctor, because there's all this tale of a trickster or a warrior would drop out of the sky and change your world. It felt very obvious. That said, what I thought was going to happen was I thought that they were going to open that up and it was going to be a future incarnation of the Doctor. Whether it actually be something like the Valeyard, or I thought maybe it was going to be Matt Smith again, just looking older. But it was none of those things. It was empty because he wasn't in it yet. So while I did call that all the myths of what was in the Pandorica was referring to the Doctor, and I was correct about that, I kind of like that I didn't call on first viewing that it was a trap that they were going to put him into, as opposed to something that some incarnation of him was already in. I thought that was kind of cool. I thought that was kind of clever. There's a lot of little touches I like about this. River is doing good work. She's fun. I mean, like, how'd she smuggle in the hallucinogenic lipstick into her frigging storm cage? I don't know. That thing barely seems to hold her anyway, but whatever. We get Rory back, and I love how low-key his reintroduction is. He just shows up, trying to get the doctor's attention, and the doctor's talking to him, and even says his name repeatedly, but it doesn't quite register what it is that's going on. And I love that he actually says to Rory, oh, there's something big I'm missing. It's right in front of me, and I know I'm missing it. And Rory just says, yeah, I think you're probably right. Give me a minute, I'll get it. He walks off screen and then just walks back. I love that. I thought that was played terrifically. I think Rory's reaction to, and his desperation at trying to get Amy to remember him again, and his initial gut punch to him that she doesn't, I think that sells really well. I personally think that the idea that they do with the Cybermen, that this idea that if the robotic components are still working, but the organic components have died, that it's going to look for a new parts. I kind of like that, and that makes sense to me. Now, I'm sure some people, actually I've seen some people in like forums and whatnot go like, why don't these things ever do it otherwise? I'm like, well, because generally every other time we've seen Cybermen destroyed, or at least Cybermen of this level of advancement destroyed, the robotics weren't really left either. So, like, I'm prepared to accept that, and it tracks for me. Again, there's a very fun vibe, but as it's building towards the end, it goes dark quite well as the Doctor gets locked up, as the TARDIS begins to shake apart and explode, as Rory, because of his programming, because he's actually a Nestene, shoots Amy. This thing, and then the freaking universe explodes. I ranked this very high when I did my list of best cliffhangers that the show has done. This is a really good cliffhanger. This is the epitome of how the heck do we get out of this? Like on every part of this. How do we get out of this? TARDIS blowing up. Huh? Amy's just been shot. The Doctor's locked up. Ha! The universe exploded. Ha! It's a pileup of how do we get out of this. And I think it works very well. Again, it could have just felt like overload, but it doesn't. I don't think it does at any rate. So, are there any things that don't really work here? Not really, actually. I mean, like, there's tiny nitpicky things, like the hallucinogenic lipstick, which I mentioned. There's things that bother me, but not because of here, but because of some of the dangling plot threads and dangling ideas between this and the Big Bang that never really got properly tied off. At least I don't feel like they did. But that's not something to hold against this episode. I suppose if I was gonna complain about anything, I'll touch on this because it is something that I complain about, and I'm more or less okay with it this time, which is that the Doctor banking on his reputation. In this case, literally just daring them, all these aliens flying around, to come down and take the Pandorica from him. And he just dares them, and they back down. Well, a couple reasons I'm okay with that. First off, it's actually kind of a ruse, since they're there waiting for him to open it up so they can shove him into it anyways. So they're kind of playing him way more than he knows. But even setting that aside, just the fact that they are there to take him down anyways, I like that within the same story, his reputation is invoked, and it turns out that it's the reason that everything is going horribly wrong. I like that happening. Whereas some of the instances where it's going to happen later, first of all, feel redundant and repetitive, because this is kind of it. This feels like this should have been the capping off of the entire premise of the Doctor's reputation has gotten so big that, you know, these bad things are now done specifically out of fear of him. I feel like this should have capped off that idea, so when it comes back again in the next series, it feels repetitive, it feels redundant, and it doesn't feel as properly earned as it does here. At least I don't think it did. And maybe I'll feel different when I get to the rewatch on that. But that's sort of like, if this had been the last time the Doctor basically walked into a room, said, "I'm the Doctor," and everybody just went, "Argh!" If this had been the last time, it's probably not something I would complain about. Because this should have been the peak of that hill. But it wasn't. But again, that's not even really a problem with this episode. That's a problem with something that I get irritated as it comes up later. But this episode, by itself, I think it's great. I think it is a great first half. It manages to be fun and bouncy and then just bring everybody together for the size and scope of the threat. And then to go so dark and to end on the cliffhanger it does, that's pretty impressive. So come on back in a week so I can tell you why it completely falls apart in the second half. Ha ha ha! You seen the Pandorica opens again lately? If you have, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. There's a bunch of stuff to do as well, because you can like, subscribe, both of which help me. If you really want to assist, you can head on to the Patreon and chip me in $1 a month or whatever you feel comfortable giving. It helps me cover my bills and make the channel a bigger and better thing, hopefully. So other links down there besides, click on them, check things out, or don't. You don't have to, because at the end of the day, folks, you're the council. I'm just running the meetings, and until next time, this council is adjourned.